I do also just want to update all of our viewers. I have heard from the company. They are not confirming at this point the fatality that we have heard reports of. It had been reported that one of the pilots had died. Virgin not confirming that information at this point. But back to Leroy for a moment here. How will the FAA approach this investigation, do you think?
The FAA will approach this investigation like any other, aircraft accident or mishap, and so you can be sure they'll be looking at all the factors that could have gone into it. They'll be collecting the debris, and I'm sure that everyone will be cooperating fully with them to get to the bottom of what happened as quickly as possible.
What other organizations do you think, Leroy, are going to be playing a role in this investigation?
Well, it'll mostly be the FAA because the suborbital FAA is the governing body for suborbital flights. NASA is not involved in any of these developments, the spacecraft development or operations, and so I would expect it would only be the FAA.
Pimm Fox joining me here as well, and I'd like to get your view in addition, Leroy, but let me just ask you, Pimm, you're familiar with these engines on these
well, I was going to ask also Leroy Chiao about this because
you wonder how combustible they are.
Right. Well, Leroy Chiao, maybe you can come in on this because this is new hybrid rocket motor technology. Typically, you've got either a solid, a solid fuel source or you have a liquid fuel source. You got to run that oxidizer over the fuel in some way because there's not a lot of oxygen, obviously, in the upper atmosphere. And this was the hybrid rocket motor technology that was being used. Are you familiar with this?
I'm familiar with the general operating principle of the engine, and you're exactly right. It's basically a rubber material. You pass nitrogen N2O over it to the oxidizer, and so it's kind of a hybrid motor where it's not really a true solid, but it uses that solid rubber fuel. Just from the news reports I've seen, it seems that they were changing the mixture of that or trying a different material, and so whether or not that played into what happened today remains, that'll have to come out in the investigation report. But it's a kind of a unique motor. It was also used on Spaceship One. Although a much smaller motor, much smaller vehicle on Spaceship One 10 years ago, when it became the first vehicle, privately funded vehicle to break into space.
Mm-hmm. You have been an advocate for private funding of space. Is this accident in any way going to change the appetite to fund this from a private level?
Well, anytime you have a mishap, of course, it makes everybody pause, and it certainly doesn't make the environment better. But on the other hand, this is a development program. Anytime you look back at the history of developing high-performance aircraft and other programs like that, unfortunately, because you are developing, especially with a new propulsion system and new airframe, things like that, you're going to have incidents. And you do everything you can to minimize the risks. But the fact is, developing a new aircraft or spacecraft, you're not going to be able to eliminate all the risks.
I do want to update everybody on some additional headlines. According to the Sheriff's Office, Bloomberg News is reporting that the Sheriff's Office is saying that one pilot has died in this crash and that the other is injured. Again, to highlight the fact that the company has not yet said that, the company telling me that they cannot confirm this. The Virgin Galactic pilot is said to have been ejected before the crash, according to the Sheriff's Office, and that one of the pilots suffered moderate to major injuries. Cory Johnson, we are anticipating a news conference at 5 p.m. Today, 2 p.m. local there, your time, from the Mojave Space Center. Any sense of what we're going to hear in that?
Well, understand that as a business effort, what Virgin Galactic is trying to do is very different than what the other companies in this sort of private space race are involved in. They're trying to launch something for tourists, something that's going to involve consumers who can buy the right to be at this kind of a risk. Crashes in rocket ships happen a lot more than they do in commercial aircraft. The safety of commercial aircraft is fairly incredible. We would have hundreds of crashes every in a short period of time if we were sort of at the same rate as we have in rocket ships that were in planes. So to offer a tourism thing is an important part of this. Virgin has been involved in a lot of things to get people ready for this, not just taking the deposits of $250,000 from future passengers. They've also been doing training flights, partnering with a company called Zero G. I went on one of those flights last year where I got to experience what zero gravity was like, flying in an especially outfitted 737, was doing parabolic loops over the Gulf of Mexico. I took off from Cape Canaveral for that effort, and that's something that Virgin's doing with partnering with them so that their future astronauts will get practice there as well. So this is a big experimental program, but it's expected to get to where their hope is that it will have the same kind of safety record that we're accustomed to with airplanes. Obviously, this is a great damage to that sort of PR tail.
This is indeed a setback. Because to your point, this is directed at consumers. Leroy, what is the most dangerous part of flying a vehicle like this?
Well, in any flying vehicle, the biggest risks are during takeoff and landing. And so I don't know exactly when the incident occurred today, but from the news reports I've seen, it was shortly after it separated from the carrier aircraft and ignited its rocket engine. You know, and I want to stress that this is, at this point, it's a development program. Actually, Virgin Galactic is contracted with Scaled Composites to help develop the aircraft and do the flight testing. So actually the pilots would be probably the Scaled Composite pilots.
You know, how common is that for a brand like Virgin to be backing a smaller company like that? So Scaled Composites being the actual creator of this technology, and Virgin sort of being the frontman.
Yeah, to that, Tricia, you know, Scaled Composites is now a division of Northrop Grumman. So Northrop Grumman did about $10 billion in aerospace revenues last year. Scaled Composites, a piece of that, we don't know how big because Northrop Grumman doesn't break that out separately anymore. But, you know, this for Virgin to go at this, they're hiring the best people they can to get that. They think they've found those at Northrop Grumman and with the brilliant ideas that came out of Scaled Composites, but with a long history in aerospace that Northrop Grumman can bring to bear.
How significant do you consider what Virgin is trying to do here, Leroy? I mean, bringing people up into the orbit of space. It's not like they're taking you to Mars or to the moon, but just getting you into space and taking you back down. How big a deal is it?
Right, and what they're doing is called suborbital flights, so they're actually going into orbit, and they're building on the success of Spaceship One 10 years ago, the idea being, hey, can we scale this vehicle up and then use it for tourism? And also some research. So, it is significant in that they are poised to maybe become the first operator to offer, regular access to space, commercially.